Imagine this. You're grinding grain with a stone. Your arms ache. Your hands are raw and bleeding. You've been at it for hours, and you're only halfway through what your family needs for the week. Around you, women and children hungrily watch the pile of flour grow so slowly, so painfully slowly. Your wife is pregnant with your fourth child, your oldest son is too young to help, and you know that tomorrow, and the day after that, you'll be back here, doing the exact same thing, again and again and again, until your arms give out or you die. This was the reality for billions of people across millennia. This was survival. This was hell. But what if someone had said to you, I'm going to build something that will do this work for you. The water itself will do it. The river will grind your grain while you sleep. You would have thought he was insane. Yet someone, somewhere, someday, actually did exactly that. And his name was lost to history. The Before Times, a world of manual labour. To understand just how revolutionary the mill was, we need to step back and understand the crushing monotony of ancient life. When humans first transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture, around 10,000 years ago, they thought they were winning. They had reliable food, they could stay in one place, they could build civilization. What they didn't realize was that they'd traded one kind of exhaustion for another. Grinding grain by hand was backbreaking work. In ancient Egypt, women typically did the grinding, sometimes starting before dawn and working until well after dusk. Studies of mummified remains show that women's spines were often compressed and deformed from the constant repetitive motion of the grinding stone. Arthritis set in early. Their knees buckled. Their shoulders became permanently misaligned. In Rome, this task was so despised that it was often assigned to slaves, not as punishment for a specific crime, but as a permanent sentence. To be assigned to the mill was considered a death sentence, a slow one, measured in years of agony. The querner-simple two-stone device where the top stone was rotated by hand over a stationary bottom stone was the best technology had to offer, and it was utterly insufficient. A woman grinding grain for her family could process perhaps 2 to 4 kilograms per day if she worked continuously. A family needed far more than that. Some communities tried using animals. They would harness donkeys or oxen to rotate the upper millstone. This was progress, yes, but it required owning expensive livestock. It required space. It required constant care and feeding. Most people simply couldn't afford it. The man, nobody remembers somewhere in the ancient world. Historians debate whether it was in Asia Minor, Egypt, Greece or Persia. A man looked at this problem and refused to accept it as inevitable. We don't know his name. We don't know what he looked like. We don't know if he had children, or if he was honoured in his lifetime, or if he died in obscurity. History didn't bother recording it, but his mind worked differently than other minds. He watched the river. Rivers had always been present, of course. Every civilization depended on them, but most people saw rivers as simply a feature of the landscape, a resource for water, a transportation route, a boundary. They didn't see potential. This man saw power. There's a compelling theory that he was a slave, or someone very poor. Perhaps he was grinding grain himself, morning after morning, and his mind was wandering the only freedom available to him when he noticed something. The current was swift that day. Leaves and branches moved past him rapidly, pushed by the water's force. What if, he might have thought, that power could be harnessed? The birth of the watermill, the first watermills, were likely incredibly simple. We're talking basic engineering here, not sophisticated machinery. Picture this: a river or stream with good current. A simple wooden wheel, perhaps constructed from logs, roughly circular, buckets or paddles attached to the wheel's rim. As the water current pushed against these buckets, the wheel would turn. Attached to the wheel's axle was a shaft, and attached to that shaft was the upper millstone. When the wheel turned, the stone turned, and when the stone turned, grain was ground. Was this the first design? Nobody knows. There might have been earlier versions with different mechanisms. Perhaps some cultures developed gears independently. Perhaps the technology evolved gradually across multiple regions, with different communities discovering similar solutions to the same problem. But at some point, someone made it work. The description might sound simple, but imagine the creativity required, the understanding of mechanical advantage, the ability to visualize how forces could be transferred, the engineering knowledge needed to construct something that would actually function, not collapse on the first attempt. Most importantly, the audacity to believe it was possible. The resistance. Here's what most history books don't tell you. The mill was not immediately celebrated. When this first mill appeared, it likely faced fierce resistance, and not from ignorant people afraid of innovation. This is important. The resistance came from those who benefited from the status quo, who depended on hand grinding for their livelihood, professional millers and flour merchants. If a farmer could grind his own grain with water power, he no longer needed to pay someone to do it. If a community could build a communal mill, they no longer needed to purchase pre-ground flour at inflated prices. The mill threatened an entire economic system. In some places and times, there's evidence that mill building was actually suppressed. Landowners who controlled the labour, whether through slavery or serfdom, resisted the technology. Why allow something that would make your workforce redundant? It took centuries for the mill to truly spread. The explosion of possibility. But eventually, impossibly, watermills began appearing across the world. The Roman Empire gradually adopted them, though adoption was slow. By the time the Roman Empire fell, mills were becoming more common across the Mediterranean and Europe. Then came the Middle Ages, and everything changed. Medieval Europe became obsessed with mills, not just watermills, but windmills too, another innovation born when someone looked at an invisible natural force and figured out how to harness it. By the thousands, hundreds of mills dotted the European landscape. By the 1200s, thousands. Communities competed to build bigger, better mills. Mills became status symbols. Mill building became a craft, an art form, and grain wasn't the only thing being milled anymore. Once the basic principle was established, humans became creative. Mills were used to saw would imagine building a cathedral without the ability to mill lumber. Mills powered bellows for blacksmiths. Mills operated hydraulic systems for lifting. Mills became the basis of early industrial power. The watermill was essentially the world's first power plant. The multiplication effect. Here's where it gets truly staggering. Consider the time freed up by the mill. A woman no longer spending 4 hours per day grinding grain suddenly had 4 hours available. 4 hours to do something else. To care for children, to make textiles, to work in fields, to create. Multiply that across a society, multiply it across generations. A woman spending 4 hours grinding grain could do it for perhaps 50 years of her life. That's 73,000 hours of labour, transformed into something else. Now multiply that by every woman in a village, by every village in a region, by every region in the world. We're talking about millions of human lives being fundamentally altered. The time freed up by labour-saving devices is what allows civilization to advance. It's why the Industrial Revolution happened in places where labour was beginning to be mechanized. It's why the most advanced societies are those where people don't spend all their time on subsistence. Without the mill and later machines, we wouldn't have art, literature, science, philosophy in the forms we know them. We'd still be grinding grain. The forgotten inventor's legacy. But here's the tragedy. The man, or men, or woman who created the mill remains unnamed and uncelebrated. We know the names of countless emperors who did less for humanity than this person. We know the names of philosophers who wrote about the nature of power while never understanding true power. We know the names of warriors and rulers and politicians. But the person who saved humanity from the curse of hand-grinding grain, unknown, unremembered, possibly not even recorded as existing. This raises a fascinating question. How many unknown inventors have shaped human civilization? How many people created something that changed the world, but died without anyone writing their name down? How many times did humanity leap forward on the backs of individuals who never got credit? The mill builder represents all of them. The ripple across time. The effects of the mill didn't stop in medieval Europe. The technology spread eastward. It reached Asia. It reached the Americas when Europeans arrived. Everywhere it went, it transformed societies. Think about what the mill enabled, the growth of cities. Without mills to process grain at scale, you couldn't feed dense urban populations. The mill made cities possible, the rise of craft specialization. If you didn't have to spend half your day grinding grain, you could become a blacksmith, a baker, a teacher, a scholar. The accumulation of surplus. Mills could process far more grain than the immediate needs of a family, allowing for storage, trade, and the support of non-agricultural workers. The development of industrial thinking. Mills required planning, maintenance, engineering knowledge, and business management. They were the first large-scale mechanical systems most communities encountered. They taught people how to think mechanically, which eventually led to more complex machines. In many ways, the person who built the first mill was the first true engineer. He or she understood that problems could be solved not through harder work, but through smarter work, through understanding nature and bending its forces to human will. What we know and what we don't. Historians have tried to trace the origins of the mill. The evidence suggests that watermills emerged independently in multiple locations, or that knowledge of them spread through trade networks from an original source. The earliest clear evidence of watermills comes from the Hellenistic period, around 200 BCE, with designs described by the ancient engineer Philo of Byzantium. But by that time, the basic technology was likely already ancient. Philo was describing and improving upon something that already existed. Some scholars point to earlier references. The ancient Greek geographer Strabo mentioned a mill powered by a slave and described it as a novelty, suggesting mills might have been a new technology in the Hellenistic period. But this doesn't tell us who invented them. Others point to Asia, suggesting mills might have originated in China or Central Asia. There's evidence of very old mills in various locations, but dating is difficult and definitive proof elusive. The truth is, we may never know exactly who invented the mill. And perhaps that's appropriate. The mill belongs to humanity as a whole, not to any individual person. The lessons of an unknown inventor. But what can we learn from the mill builder? What can this unknown person teach us? First, simple solutions are often revolutionary. The watermill wasn't complicated by modern standards. It was elegant and basic. Often, the most powerful innovations are the ones that seem obvious in retrospect. Second, the best innovations often come from direct experience with problems. This person likely ground grain themselves, or watched others do it, or experienced the suffering it caused. This proximity to the problem informed the solution. Third, audacity matters. Most people faced with the problem of grain grinding would have simply accepted it as an unchangeable part of human existence. This person didn't accept that. He asked, why not? Instead of, why should I? Fourth, invisible problems often yield to understanding invisible forces. Most people didn't see the river's power because they were looking for something obvious. This person understood that power isn't always visible. It's harnessed through understanding and engineering. The endless parade of unknowns. The story of the mill builder should humble us. Every technology we use today is built on the backs of thousands of unknown innovators. The person who figured out how to sharpen a flint tool, the person who first realized you could preserve meat with salt, the person who understood that plants grew from seeds, the person who invented the wheel. We celebrate the Edisons and the Jobs and the Musks of our time. We're obsessed with attributing invention to individual geniuses. But most of history's actual innovations came from people whose names we'll never know. This is sobering. It's also strangely beautiful. It means that innovation is fundamentally human. It's not the province of the rare genius. It's something built into our species. Given a problem to solve, humans naturally try to solve it. We tinker, we experiment, we imagine, we fail, we try again. And sometimes, out of that endless human experimentation, something like a mill appears. Something that changes everything. The future mill builders. As you're watching this video right now, there are people inventing things that will transform the world. Their names are probably unknown to you. They might be working in a garage or a laboratory or a field. They might be poor. They might be female in a society that doesn't value female engineers. They might be in a country that most of the world ignores, but they're solving problems. They're harnessing forces. They're creating tools that will eventually free people from labor. That's what the mill represents. The moment when humans stopped accepting suffering as inevitable and started solving it. That moment has happened hundreds of times in history, and it's still happening. The mill builder's name is lost, but his or her achievement is written into every water wheel, every power plant, every machine that has freed human beings from pointless labor. That's a legacy worth remembering, even if we can't remember the face, the voice, or the name of the person who started it all. The final truth. We'll never know who built the first mill. We'll never sit down with him over a meal and hear the story directly from his lips. We'll never understand what inspired him on that particular day. We'll never know if he was celebrated or mocked or forgotten immediately by his own community. But somewhere, someone looked at the power of water and decided that it could work for humanity. And he was right. And that single choice rippled through history in ways that completely transformed human civilization. That's the real power of innovation. You don't have to know who did it for it to matter. You just have to do it. Because somewhere in the future, someone will be grinding grain by hand, or doing some other impossible, exhausting task. And they won't know your name. But if you build the mill, if you see the problem and refuse to accept it, they'll be free because of you. That's enough. That was always enough.